Well, again, let me say thank you for the invitation to be with you. It's always been a delight every time that I've been here to be among brethren, folks who know and love the Lord. Tim told me that I'm supposed to speak to you about strong drink, particularly as it pertains to the book of Proverbs. So the first thing I want you to do for me tonight is this. Get out of your head that mental image of Cheers on TV. Cliff Clavin and Sam Malone and all those characters are not a realistic, reasonable, accurate representation of what we're going to discuss tonight. I believe in recreational alcohol use. If you're talking about using alcohol as a fuel for a top dragster or for a NASCAR race car or something like that. I enjoy watching those things go round and round. I don't know why. I can't name 1 out of 100 drivers. I don't follow anybody in particular, but I live a few miles from Atlanta Motor Speedway. I will never pay what it would cost to go in there and watch a race because it's outrageous. But it fascinates me to watch those people go fast. That's why I drive an old truck that doesn't go fast. Maybe I've just got that temptation that I keep out of the way. If your idea of recreational alcohol use is motor fuel, power to you. That's good. As far as using it as a beverage, though, that's another story entirely. I believe that the Scriptures make a plain and irrefutable case against that practice. I don't think there's any question. I don't think there's any debate. Now, what I think doesn't matter. It's my opinion. The question is, what does the Scriptures say? And that's the object of the exercise tonight. There are 3 passages in the book of Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 20 and verse 1. Chapter 31, verses 4 and 6, that actually use the words strong drink in the King James translation. 2 of them are unequivocal statements that this is bad. The third one says this is useful in a medicinal context. But you will not find strong drink. And we'll talk about the distinction between wine and strong drink in a minute. You will not find strong drink described in a positive way as a beverage or as a social lubricant in the New Testament or in the Old Testament. It's not there. The expression for strong drink appears about 60 times in various forms through the Old Testament. 55 of them have to do with drunkenness. The other 5 are basically metaphorical uses of the word. Those verses in Proverbs show us the character, the effects of alcohol. Look at Proverbs chapter 20, verse 1. As soon as I get the page to turn back. Wine is a mocker. Strong drink is raging or is a brawler. But notice what it says next. Whoever errs thereby, whoever is led astray by it, is not wise. Well, that's a genteel, roundabout way of saying that's just plumb stupid. Do we really need to even say any more at this point? Look at Proverbs chapter 31. We go to Proverbs 31 and many times we just overlook the first 9 verses and pick up at verse 10, verse 11 and talk about the worthy woman. But the first 9 verses, we have instructions to Lemuel the king from his mother. And notice what she says in verse 4. It is not for kings to drink wine. It's not for princes to say, where is strong drink, lest they drink and forget the law and pervert the justice that's due to any that's afflicted. Give strong drink to him that's ready to perish, and and wine unto the bittering soul. There is a legitimate medicinal use for these sorts of things, but otherwise, no. Look at verse 5. What's the impact of it? It perverts justice. It causes us, if we use it, to look at things from a cockeyed point of view, from a non-godly perspective. You go back to Genesis chapter 9, and in verse 20, we find that Noah planted a vineyard, and it says then, Noah began to be a farmer. Planted a vineyard. So far, so good. As a matter of fact, I have grapes in my backyard. I didn't know it when I bought the place. I've discovered I have muscadine grapes in 2 or 3 spots in my backyard. It was so overgrown when I bought it, we couldn't even see the back property lines. And I've been trying to clear it out, and I've actually found the fences. So I've made some progress. I've discovered that deer love muscadine grapes because it puts on these beautiful clusters of grapes, and before they get ripe, they're gone. Nothing but nibbled stems left. If I didn't live in a suburban neighborhood, I'd have venison for dinner. Grape-fed venison. That might be good. My neighbors would get a little excited if I were to get a rifle out, though. And I'm a lousy shot with a bow. So the deer eat the grapes, and I don't have to worry about getting drunk on grapes. So far, so good. There's nothing wrong with Noah planting a vineyard. Vineyards can be good things. They provide shade. When I was a kid, we had a grape arbor in the backyard. My dad built a framework and trained the grapes up over it. We had a great big hammock out there. It's a great place to take a nap on a hot summer afternoon. Cool shade. You couldn't enjoy your raisin bran in the morning if it weren't for grapes. You just have bran. Who wants that? We couldn't have grape juice for the Lord's Supper. Somebody hadn't planted a vineyard. Noah's trouble came not from planting a vineyard. It came from what he did with the grapes once they got ripe. What did he do? Well, he made wine. Drank wine and was drunk and became uncovered in his tent. It took away his judgment. It impaired his judgment. He did something foolish because of the influence of something that otherwise would have been innocent. He misused it. Now, grapes produce grape juice. You can't have grape juice without grapes, can you? That's just the way the world works. Left alone, what will grape juice do in time? Whether it's in the grape or out, eventually it will ferment and become somewhat alcoholic. And drinking alcoholic grape juice in sufficient quantities will make you stupid. It will make you drunk. I had a bird dog when I was a child. She lived 19 years. Bird dogs are long-lived. But we had a persimmon tree in the backyard. Why in the world my dad wanted a persimmon tree? I don't know. I've never tasted anything so sour and tart and just turns your mouth inside out in all my life. And persimmons are only good once they get so ripe that they're just almost gooey. And they would fall, and my dog would eat persimmons. Strange dog. But you know, when persimmons fall, they tend to break and they begin to ferment just like grapes do, basically. And that silly dog would get so staggering, falling down drunk on fermented persimmons that we would have to pin her up to keep her away from it. I had a drunk for a dog. That's true. She lived a long time. I don't know that there's any connection. Maybe her insides were pickled. Consuming strong drink causes one to lose one's inhibitions, just like that dog did. Behave improperly, just like that dog did. Noah, in his case, caused him to uncover himself, to be found in an embarrassing, compromising situation. It also causes unpleasant consequences for other people. Noah's sons didn't get drunk. There's no reason for us to doubt that Noah loved his sons and his grandchildren. We have no reason to think that he wanted anything bad to happen to any of them. But what happened? Noah got drunk. His son Ham saw the effect, and for some reason, Ham was amused, tickled, whatever. Points it out to his brothers. Look, see what happened to Dad? They go in and cover him up, going backwards so as not to see his humiliation. And what happens? Noah ends up with a curse on his grandson, Canaan. So Noah awoke from his wine, knew his younger son, what his younger son had done to him. And he said, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants, he shall be his brethren." Genesis chapter 9, verses 24 and 25. Is that what Noah started out to do? We know better. That wasn't the result that he was aiming for. Maybe he didn't know what grape juice with a kick would do to him. Maybe he was innocent. A little hard to imagine, though, given that God had just destroyed a perverted, warped, twisted, defiled world a little earlier in Noah's life. Whether it's family members that are abused by drunks or victims of car accidents caused by drunken driving, it makes no difference. Innocent people suffer because of the presence, the use, the influence of wine and strong drink in the world. Now I want you to join with me and consider some reasons Christians ought to pay attention to what Solomon has to say here and what all of the Bible has to say on the subject of wine and strong drink. And let's not follow in Noah's footsteps. So let's start by looking at alcohol in the Bible. I don't want to beat this to death, but no reasonable person denies that the Bible condemns the sin of drunkenness. You know, it's a lot of people. Let me stop here, by the way. I don't propose that this be a one-way lecture. If you have a comment or a question, wave at me, raise your hand, speak up. I'd be glad to have this be a dialogue, not a monologue. But in the absence of any response, I'm a preacher. Tim, you know what preachers do. I'm going to preach. That being said, no reasonable person disputes that the Bible condemns drunkenness. Folks want to argue about, well, how drunk is drunk? And it's okay to drink as long as you don't get drunk and things like that. But we go to Romans chapter 13 and verse 13. What do you find there? Paul admonishes the Roman Christians, let us walk properly, the New King James Version, as in the day, not in revelry and drunkenness, not in lewdness and lust, not in strife and envy. Drunkenness is not part of walking properly before God. Go to 1 Corinthians chapter 5 and you find in verse 11, I have written to you not to keep company with anyone named a brother who is sexually immoral, the King James Version says a fornicator, or covetous, or an idolater, or a reviler, or guess what? Don't hang around with brethren that are drunkards, or extortioners, not even to eat with such persons. That's something that is incompatible with upright Christian living. We look at 1 Corinthians chapter 6. Just turn the page. Look at verses 9 and 10. Familiar verses to us. Know ye not that the unrighteous shall not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived. Neither fornicators, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor effeminate, nor abusers of themselves with mankind, nor thieves, nor covetous, nor... Oh, guess what? Along with the sexual perverts and the warped people and so forth, drunkards and revilers and extortioners, these people don't get to go to heaven. They shall not inherit the kingdom of God. They persist in these things. Go on to Galatians chapter 5, another familiar passage. We look at the works of the flesh in verses 19 through 21. It's very plain. It states the works of the flesh are manifest, which means obvious, which are these: fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousies, wrath, factions, divisions, partyings, envyings. Oh, drunkenness, revelings, and such like, other things of the same character. You know, let's stop here and let me just give you a little something free for about 10 seconds here. Those words, and such like, tell us that God has endowed us with the intelligence to recognize things of the same kind. That's why he doesn't have to specify in here, don't smoke crack and don't shoot up heroin and things like that. We don't have to have everything itemized and specified to the nth degree, because the nature of evil is that Satan will always find some slight variation, and so there will always be somebody say, well, it doesn't say not to do that, but it does say, and such like, which means God made you smart enough to recognize things that are similar. These things of which I forewarn you, even as I did for, Paul says, I'm telling you this just like I've already told you this one. Do you suppose Paul ever got tired of telling them over and over? I'm telling you this, I've already told you this. Those who practice such things shall not inherit the kingdom of God. He doesn't say if you've ever done this, you can't go to heaven. He says if you do this, if this is ongoing with you, you can't go to heaven in those conditions. There's a lot of folks that try to defend social use of alcohol, as long as the drinker doesn't just become falling down, snockered, sloppy drunk. Inebriated. Oh, it's all right if you just get a buzz on. Well, what's the slogan you see on the billboard? Buzzed driving is what? Drunken driving? Does it tell us anything when they compare the likelihood of an automobile accident from texting while driving with driving while under the influence? I'm sorry, it's not under the influence of text. Driving while drunk. Those that defend the use of strong drink try to emphatically point to the Hebrew word yahin and the Greek word oinos, that are the words that are typically translated as wine in our English translations of the Bible. And they say, well, that means exclusively intoxicating wine, and Jesus made intoxicating wine. John chapter 10 says, it must be okay. We were just talking at the back of the auditorium a little while ago before we started about how even the prominent religious bodies in our nation derive a sizable portion of their financial assets from brewing and distilling wines and liquor and alcohol of various sorts. Something's wrong there. Something doesn't add up in that kind of equation. It's true that the Hebrew word yahin, which appears about 140 times in the Old Testament, typically refers to what we recognize as wine, something with an alcoholic component, a kick to it. Noah and Lot were able to drink it and get drunk on it. We already looked at Noah in Genesis chapter 9. Aaron's family and all of the Nazarites of ancient Israel were expressly forbidden to drink it under certain conditions. Aaron's warned, don't you drink this stuff and then go try to serve in the Lord's house. Oh, that doesn't work. You need to be stone cold sober in the Lord's presence. And that's not to say, oh, it's all right to get drunk otherwise. This was used in drink offerings to the Lord in the Old Testament. The word appears in conjunction with shekar, strong drink, about 12 times in the Old Testament. It's translated in the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, by the word oinos that we recognize in the New Testament, wine. Shekar, that word that means strong drink, as I said a while ago, is about 60 times in the Old Testament. And the most common translation, most common meaning of that word is to be drunk. The next most common is to make somebody drunk. Don't give strong drink to somebody. Literally means don't get somebody drunk. Well, why would you give them this if that's what it's going to do to them? Go over to the New Testament for a moment. In the Septuagint Old Testament, the word oinos, wine, can be used and can describe unfermented grape juice, what we typically use in the Lord's Supper. Welches, as they say. It's by itself simply refers to the fruit of the vine. It doesn't specify whether it's alcoholic or not. To try to make the case that it absolutely is to push it beyond what it actually means. It's to put a meaning on it that's not there. You go to John chapter 2, look at verses 1 through 10, the wedding feast at Cana of Galilee. And how many folks that want to justify the use of alcohol, and isn't it funny how we go from the use of wine, John 2, which in its natural state has an alcoholic component of about 12.5%. Isn't it funny how folks will jump from wine in John chapter 2 to 150 proof brandy, which is about 75% alcohol, and whiskey and beer and cocktails and gin and vodka and all these other things? Oh, it's all the same thing. You've got to be drunk to believe that. But in John chapter 2, this is a Bible example of godly people drinking alcoholic drinks. You really want to go there? Jesus, his mother, his disciples are at a wedding feast in Cana of Galilee. They run out of oinos, wine. Mary suggests, the way mothers do, that Jesus, you ought to do something about this. And he's not really very accommodating about it, but she turns to the servants and says, y'all do whatever he tells you to do. And what do? He says, go fill these water pots. They're firkins. They hold somewhere between 15 and 20 gallons apiece. That's somewhere between 125 roughly and 150 gallons. Go fill them with water. Now draw this out, take it to the master of the feast. That's the best wine we've had all night. Do you seriously want to say that Jesus made 150 gallons of alcoholic wine? That's exactly what a lot of folks want the Bible to say. But look at verse 10. This takes place after the wedding guests have drunk freely. In other words, they've already scarfed up every drop of wine on the place. And it doesn't specify whether it was alcoholic or not. But everything that was there to drink, they drunk. Now, do we really want to think, okay, for argument's sake, let's say there are 500 guests at the wedding. Jesus makes 150 gallons. That's about a quart per guest for these folks who've already drunk freely, as John says. A quart is basically a whole bottle per guest. Do we really want to say that Jesus was going to get these people drunk by making that much wine for them? Creates quite a dilemma for those who insist that Jesus created alcoholic drinks here. Giving a quart of wine to people who'd already drunk freely is nothing more than supporting and encouraging them to get drunk. And that's a soul-condemning sin we've already seen. Those that are drunken can't go to heaven. Think about what the prophet Habakkuk said. Back in the Old Testament, in Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 15 and 16. Woe to him who gives drink to his neighbor. Oh, by the way, that's that same concept of strong drink. Woe to him who gets his neighbor drunk. Pressing him to your bottle, even to make him drunk, that you may look on his nakedness. You're filled with shame instead of glory. You also drink and be as exposed as uncircumcised. The cup of the Lord's right hand will be turned against you, and utter shame will be on your glory. In other words, if it's sauce for the goose, it's sauce for the gander. If you're going to do this to him, do it to yourself. Now, there are various ancient sources that tell us what wine and strong drink in these ancient days actually were. Fermentation is a natural process. Without it, grape juice will ferment. Without refrigeration, grape juice will ferment. Modern wines are fortified with extra sugar, extra alcohol to increase the alcoholic content. Typical naturally made wine tops out at about 12.5% alcohol by volume, and you have to drink a lot of it to get drunk. Strong drinks in the modern world are distilled for the express purpose of multiplying the alcoholic content in them to remove water and leave alcohol. The very few people who studied the subject of wines and strong drink in Bible times that would argue that either one is totally non-alcoholic. Clearly, in some contexts, it is. How else did Noah get drunk? But instead of fortifying wine to make it stronger in ancient days, what did the ancient people typically do? They diluted it, typically, to keep from getting drunk. Ancient writers tell us of what they call wine that was actually diluted, about 20 parts water to 1 part wine, specifically to prevent people from getting drunk on it. That produces about 1% or less alcohol per serving or per drink. That's about the same amount of alcohol as kefir. Anybody here know what kefir is? Fermented goat's milk. It's got all kinds of supposedly good probiotics and all this kind of stuff naturally occurring in it. People drink it for digestive distress. No, I didn't say that. But what we're talking about here has about the same alcoholic content, which is practically none. It's clear that the alcoholic content was very low by modern standards. They understood maybe not very much about bacteria and viruses in those days. In fact, they didn't understand anything about bacteria and viruses. But they did figure out, you know what, if we put a little bit of this wine in water, it makes the water safe to drink. Kills the bacteria is what it does. Paul acknowledged that. He wrote to Timothy, 1 Timothy chapter 5 said in verse 23, no longer drink water exclusively. Use a little wine for the sake of your stomach and frequent ailments. In that context, that's clearly got some alcoholic content to it. Grape juice would have aggravated the problem. Fresh grape juice. But the Bible does explicitly warn us against strong drink. We talk about wine, let's talk about strong drink, shekar in the Old Testament. Proverbs chapter 31, verse 4, we looked at it a moment ago. It's not for kings to drink this stuff, for princes. It's not for you because it impairs judgment. Aaron, don't drink this when you go to serve in the tabernacle, Leviticus chapter 10, verse 9. It's interesting, the New King James Version there in Leviticus 10, verse 9 doesn't say strong drink. It says intoxicating drink. The NIV says fermented drink. The Douay-Rheims, the old Catholic Bible in English, says anything that may make you drunk. Aaron, in other words, was supposed to avoid all intoxicants. By the way, how many of you remember your Latin roots from studying words when you were in school? Anybody? What does intoxicant mean? Toxic? Poisonous? That tells you something about alcohol. We'll get to that in just a minute. Go back to Proverbs 20 and verse 1. Wine is a mocker. Strong drink, a brawler. Whoever's led astray by it's not wise. Strong drink is undiluted, fermented wine. Or some would say perhaps ancient beer that might have had a slightly higher alcoholic content depending on how it was brewed. But think about this. They didn't have modern distillation techniques. All they could depend on was natural fermentation for the most part. That means that about the strongest alcohol they could make would be 15, maybe 20% alcohol. And the Bible is saying anybody who drinks that, 10, 12, 15, 20%, is not wise. You will get drunk if you drink enough of it. Even in Proverbs 31 and verse 6, give it to him that's about to perish. Strong drink was used medicinally, not as a beverage. It's never used in a positive way as a beverage in the Scriptures. But now what should Christians do about alcohol in these passages? What should we learn about alcohol use from all of these passages? 3 things, just 3 basic things quickly. Number 1, don't use them because of the potential for poisoning, intoxication. Some folks, well, they can drink a little bit and they don't feel anything from it. Don't feel any adverse effects. So what? There are way more folks in this world who will not stop with just a little bit compared to those who can drink a little bit and not feel any effect from it. The University of Michigan study several years ago documents what we already know. Alcohol is the most commonly used illicit drug in the country. Oh, wait, it's not illegal. It is if you're underage. It's the most commonly used underage drug in the nation. Most young drinkers binge drink. Not all of them, but most of them do, getting completely plastered at some point. Roughly 1 in 10 drinkers becomes a problem drinker, either a complete alcoholic or somebody with a serious drinking problem. Now, think about that for a minute. We're, 100 and some odd miles from the CDC? 10% of the population doing something, getting sick from it, would be an epidemic in any other context, wouldn't it? 10% of all people who drink become problem drinkers. That's not a problem. It's true, there are some folks in this world that can imbibe alcoholic drinks without becoming drunk. What does that prove? Nothing. If it proves anything, it simply proves that no one ever got drunk without taking the first drink. If you don't ever take the first drink, you can't get drunk. What should we learn? Don't do it because of the potential for intoxication. Number 2, don't do it because of the damage it does to your body. What is your body? Temple of the Holy Spirit. 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 20, 19 and 20. Your body is the temple of the Holy Ghost. You're bought with a price. Glorify God in your body. You don't belong to you. You don't get to misuse yourself. You're not supposed to. Well, what about the purported health benefits of drinking wine? Oh, 5 ounce glass of wine a day is good for your heart. Good for your circulation. Promotes cardiac fitness and all this other kind of stuff. Helps control cholesterol. You know what? It's not the alcohol that does that. It's the flavonoids and the antioxidants in the grape that do that. The fact of the matter is you get the same health benefits from drinking Welch's that you do from Mogan David or Julio Gallo or whatever these others are. Cabernet Hoopy-Doo. The alcohol doesn't provide the additional health benefit. So why bother with it? What do we know about alcohol? It damages brain cells. Bill Cosby says you get brain damage from children. I've got 3 children. I can relate. I have a few tics of my own. But I love my children. God gave me my children. I'm not going to go and encourage more brain damage just by drinking alcohol. Even one drink produces a measurable effect on the brain. What does that tell you? The cumulative effect over time is not good under any circumstance. Causes lasting serious damage to the body's tissues. You want to talk about cirrhosis of the liver and enlarged heart and all this kind of stuff? Talk to somebody who has treated alcoholics. Raises the prospect of breast cancer in women, according to a 2007 study at Harvard. Only 2 drinks a day. It's 2 5-ounce glasses of wine, 2 shots of whiskey, or 2 beers. Only 2 drinks a day. Ladies, your risk of breast cancer goes up 32%. Cut that back to 1 drink a day, still goes up 10%. Don't drink it. It's poisonous. Don't drink it. It's not wise. It damages the body. Don't drink it. Number 3, because of the influence that you have on other people. Maybe you can drink alcohol and not get drunk and not get out of control and maintain yourself. Time up, or does that mean I've got 2 minutes? 5 minutes, okay, good. I've got time for another sermon. Maybe you can drink alcohol and not lose control and not ever get drunk, although, are you ever going to know that with 100% certainty? It only takes one mistake, one slip up to ruin that record. But if you can, does that make an occasional beer or a glass of wine or a shot of whiskey okay? For a special occasion or something? No. And here's why. People say yes, but they fail to consider the influence that they have on other people. Scriptures teach us that no one is completely independent of all people around us. We interact and impact with each other, whether we want to or not. Notice the warning that's implicit in 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 13. If meat causes my brother to stumble, Paul says, I will eat meat no more forever, that I cause not my brother to stumble. Well, what's that got to do with alcohol? The principle. Eating meat in the context was meat that had been sacrificed to pagan idols in Corinth. There were some Christians that had a problem with that. They didn't see how they could go to shambles, buy that meat, eat it, and not be engaged in idol worship. Paul knew that the practice itself was innocent. And he makes that point very clearly in both 1 Corinthians chapter 8 and chapter 10. The context shows that the practice itself was innocent. But because in the circumstance it was possible that some of the Christians might be influenced to do this against their consciences, that they might still feel that they were worshiping by doing it, paying homage to these false deities. Paul said, I'll go vegetarian if that's what it takes to save their souls. I will avoid that for that reason. There's a principle there. I am not saying that drinking alcoholic drinks is harmless behavior, just like eating a steak that came from shambles. But, folks, if I'm wrong about everything else I have said up to this point, if I'm wrong about everything else, and it is fine to drink socially, as long as you don't get drunk, then there is still a valid, legitimate objection right here. If nothing else holds any sway with you, this should. Consider your brethren. Somebody with less self-control might be encouraged by your example and thus themselves fall. That person becomes drunk by doing what he saw you do. That person's responsibility is for his own sin, yes. But you've aided and abetted that. You've encouraged it. You have a share in it as well. If there's any possibility of causing your brother or your sister to stumble, to sin by your actions, there is a very simple solution to that problem, isn't there? Don't do it. Don't do it. Our aim ought to be to follow Matthew chapter 5 and verse 16. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. Question of strong drink, social alcohol use has always been settled, at least for me, by one simple verse. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 31. Whether you eat or drink, whatever you do all to the glory of God. I don't believe that anyone can drink wine, strong drink, alcoholic beverages as a beverage to the glory of God. Whatever we eat or drink should be to the glory of God. Therefore, for me, the matter is settled. Christians should not drink